This is the Take Your Turn 2022 Tournament Go Event Round 5 recap. This was the last Swiss round, and there were 9 players. Each set was 2 games with players switching colors between games. Today we're going to go ahead and work backwards. So Mr. Cat vs. Spadius was listed as DQ, so it was either a tie, and they haven't been entered manually yet, or they were just unable to play their games. There were no replays at the time of recording to give us a definitive answer. Gorgeous Goose got a bye this round, and Faded Sun vs. Exmo was 2-0 in favor of Faded. And that leaves us with the 2 final sets for which we do have replays and we'll take a look at today. First up, we have Zeronix vs. Sequoia looking at game 1, and Sequoia was black, Zeronix was white. And if we look at the beginning of this match, it starts pretty simply. Nothing super crazy. Except that by move 12, what we see is in this lower left-hand corner, it begins to look, this early game looks a little dicey for Sequoia, as that these E3, E4 stones, let's go ahead and just do it A, B here, are being heavily pressured by the group on the left here from Zeronix, and that the presence of that K4 stone really making space limited. So then the question becomes, what is Sequoia going to do about that? How much importance does Sequoia place on those stones and in that position? Except that we go ahead and Sequoia plays elsewhere, and then Zeronix says that's fine, I'm going to go and invade at the 3-3 up in the top left. We see this resolve, and then we get this, we have Sequoia seeming to try to link up, and Zeronix trying to keep this left-hand side destabilized for Sequoia, and also try and jump out, so Sequoia is getting in the middle of it. And then we have just a little bit more territory shaping on the right-hand side before the other 3-3 jump in by Zeronix. So we have this resolve. And then as soon as that resolves, it move 37. Sequoia says, great, 3-3, 3-3, I should try that too. Comes down for the 3-3 invasion here. And then we get back, and it's around move 45, or 45, 46 here, that we're looking at the left-hand side again, and this whole section that looks very dicey, but is still open, begins to become the focus. And now, if we go a few moves later, we can see that original concern we had about those E3, E4 stones when they were just 2. If they were going to be under pressure, we find that they are under pressure, that Sequoia is trying to make life there, but is getting crunched down and getting space just constantly taken away, and is trying to make life there. And even in this upper group, we're seeing that it's looking a little dicey as well. So what's interesting to me is that I think Sequoia does a really nice job here of just very tenacious. And there's a lot of groups that are very weak. They look like they're in trouble, but Sequoia is able to get a run going here in the center, right? So if we go back just a few moves, from this single cutting point here, Sequoia is able to get this out. And not only is Sequoia able to get it out, they are able to try to turn it around, in this weak group that was under threat, or still is under threat, is now wrapped around and is also pressuring Zeronix. And unfortunately, it is just a smidge. It's a slight reading error that Sequoia first plays at J2 to extend the stone and reduce the liberty, but in so doing, doesn't see that when Zeronix follows up right here, the capture becomes a snapback. And unfortunately, that seals the fate for not only this group, it puts this center group that Sequoia had been building in under a lot of pressure as well. And as it continues, Zeronix is able to force this group down and contain it. And so even though Sequoia tries to find points elsewhere, that group is taken, and we very shortly after get to the end of the game here, where Sequoia then tries to make something happen in the top center, but Zeronix is able to start to leverage the power of these stones now in the center to prevent that from happening, and Zeronix ends up winning this game by resignation and then takes the set 2-0. In addition, we're going to go ahead and look at our second game, which is game 1, with Atreides as black and Just Your Adventure Ruler as white. So there's something a little odd right off the bat. There are 3 stones, 3 black stones on the board before there is a single white stone. Atreides and Ruler are friends, they're practice buddies, which is good to hear because Ruler is being very BM or very bad manners by essentially giving Atreides an unofficial handicap game, saying you can have these stones because if you would do it seriously, it's saying, you know, I am so good that I'm going to give you extra stones. I don't need it. And it's a taunt. So Ruler has to back this up, or he's going to look extremely foolish. We have Atreides looking for this big center play, and we can see building off the left-hand side, jumping into the center, but then also looking to get the bottom center as well. So we begin to see this framework, which means that Ruler is going to need to be aggressive, as they are very quickly. Jumping in to say, Atreides, you can try and take this, but I'm going to punish you for playing so big. I believe I have the stronger reading skills, so I'm going to jump into your space, carve out territory, and just remove any of what you're trying to build here. We have a ladder going. Atreides breaks the ladder, which works, except that now Ruler is in a much better position now in this bottom right. Now Ruler doesn't need to worry and can begin to get more aggressive. See, just a quick reinforcement on the right-hand side, and the focus then is still in the center. Ruler is crawling along, but the crawl is working right now. In situations like this as white, it's very difficult to play super loose because you are working within black's framework, and so you have to be very careful that you don't overextend. So I think it makes sense to play a little closer to the chest here, a little more conservatively. Go ahead and take the bottom left-hand corner. Ends up working out. This is nice here. Ruler doesn't try to just defend here because they decide that there's more value in linking up than trading just a couple points on this side. Because instead, if Ruler were to go ahead and try to defend here, then Atreides could come down. Ruler, seeing that, is going to say, fine, you can take a little bit of that corner. I'm going to link this up and keep everything really secure. Then we have starting to come in here and just pushing these stones around and around another ladder. Atreides breaks it, but again, now every time the ladder is broken, it's giving Ruler more strength here. So now you have another group that has some staying power and is beginning to add structure to this right-hand side and give it a lot more influence and a lot more potential territory. And I think that Atreides here is trying to contain Ruler, but is trying to also keep all their stones alive in a way that allows Ruler to just carve into their territory by attempting to protect all of their groups together. And not sacrificing stones, for example, not sacrificing these center stones and trying to cut off here, for example, it ends up allowing Ruler to start to move in. And the big thing for this game, through 3 Invasion, that I wanted to really focus on was this sequence here. This sequence is a really great example of a false ladder, and what that can mean. So the reason this is a false ladder, because it has that ladder shape, is we have 1, 2, 3, 4 liberties. The way a ladder works, for those who are less familiar, is just your ladder works on the idea that you are going to, that for example, these would be closed. And that, if we go even back one, so we're down, we do a 3 instead of 4 liberties for a second. The ladder works with the idea that you are forcing your opponent to move in a certain direction with no other options in exactly the way you want, because they always have 1 liberty. They are always in Atari. And so they are forced to move, and you construct this ladder, structures in a way so you can go in a direction and eventually capture them. What the ladder also does, but in order to do that, the ladder creates or allows for a number of weaknesses, these cutting points. And they're fine because you are always on the offensive as the one creating the ladder, so there's never an opportunity for your opponent to exploit them if the ladder is working correctly. Naturally, if there are 4 liberties instead of 1, this group is not an Atari. Ruler is happy to run this out because all it's really doing is creating more and more cutting points that Ruler can then exploit whenever they want to and get a ton of value from these stones, which we start to see right here. So we have these first 2. So this is a double Atari, which means that both at F15 and G14, one of these stones is going to be captured. Atreides has to decide which one they want to save. Same thing here. We get that pressure. Again, a double Atari. We can go ahead and take. And then this is the unfortunate move here. We're already in a lot of trouble, but sort of the unfortunate icing on the cake for Atreides is with a fake ladder like this, with a false ladder, and you have to start. You have too many weaknesses. You only get 1 move at a time, so you have to start to decide what is more valuable and what you're willing to sacrifice. Too many things are going to be under threat. So you had this F15 stone that was threatened to be captured and had been sitting there. Ruler hadn't taken advantage of it. What Atreides, I think, misses is that I believe they think this is safer, that they can go ahead and just keep this alive. We'll see that in a second. So they go ahead and try to shore up the other weakness. What they miss is the play at C14. So if we look at how that pans out, Atreides closes with F16. The C14 play comes down, and although you can put this C14 stone in Atari by playing at C13, you also have reduced yourself to 1 liberty, and it's as simple, unfortunately, as a B13 play to take it all. And with that, Atreides resigns the game, so Ruler wins that, and Ruler wins the set 2-0. I think it felt like in this game, cutting points and the exploitation of cutting points was a really big reason for Ruler's success. And another one was sort of priorities. We talk about, trying to save all the groups and the way in which it ends up hurting the framework Atreides was trying to build from, because they're trying to keep everything alive, or the direction of play that they try to keep it all alive ends up hurting all of that. So it was just a really tough game, but a really intense one because there's a lot of fighting from the get-go. And with that, the group stage for the Take Your Turn Go event concludes. After 5 rounds, about 10 weeks, we have found our top 4. So we're going to take a quick look at the standings here and then look at the semifinal matchups. In our top 4 are Fated Sun, Xeronix, Just Your Eventual Ruler, and Gorgeous Goose. Everybody who played the entire duration, she just had to step back early on, so they're listed as 0-5, but they didn't end up playing. Everybody else who played the entire duration took at least 1 set within these 5 rounds, and I think that's really fantastic to see. There was a huge disparity between inexperience and comfort at this game. We didn't have enough players to do sort of subdivide our brackets more, so there was a lot of situations in which players were having to fight people who could read much further than them, or whose tactics could feel very oppressive. And so I think that despite that, we saw great games from everybody. We saw some real growth and some real innovation happen among players. You could watch players from round 1 to round 3 change tactics and try new things, and that was really exciting to see. So really glad that we were able to watch everybody across the 5 rounds. Within our top 4, our semifinal matchups, we're going to have Faded Sun versus Gorgeous Goose and Zoronix versus Just Your Eventual Ruler, which, interestingly, is actually a rematch from round 2. At that time, Goose versus Faded didn't happen because they weren't able to play their games. So this will be the first time that we get to watch them go head-to-head. So I haven't had a chance to see as many Goose games, and I'm really curious how Goose will stack up against Faded and how that match is going to play out. Zoronix vs. Ruler I'm also excited about because we did see, they did play their games around 2 where Zoronix went 2-0, but if you looked at the individual games, they were incredibly close. And at each time, Ruler, I think, had the edge for a while and had some really great plays and approaches with spacing. But in both games, there were a couple of critical errors made that created a cascade effect. Now, obviously, both players have been practicing since then, have been playing games since then. I know Ruler has been working very, very hard on reading, and I'm curious whether that difference in time and practice means that we'll see a Ruler who can take it and close it out, because I think they are very close. If that's the case, I think these games could go either, well, I do think these games could go either way, and I think these games could absolutely go in Ruler's fashion if they can manage to really keep up the level of play when they are at their very best. So seeing how that ends up playing out is going to be very exciting. Since we're nearing the end, I did want to mention that if you're interested in a more in-depth look at the bracket stage, you can obviously check out my YouTube channel, Arnfasta. We go over most of the game 1s for across the 5 rounds and several game 2s as well, much more in depth. But for anything Wargroove related and for anything chess related in the Take Your Turn tournament, definitely keep it right here on the Groove of War channel. Thanks, everyone.